I think we do Roy and I for questions. I will unplug this just to avoid the nightmare. I'm getting seasick. Yeah, what we found is that the communities want to deal with content differently. You know, the accountants are significantly more conservative than the lawyers. Lawyers will put up an abstract just to claim an idea, and the accountants will keep everything close to the vest until it's, final, and has 3 inches of dust on it. So the communities needed to be more granular, and so that they could then have a little bit different type of sharing. What we then found out was that, interestingly enough, the granularity created connection. And so if I'm a forensic accountant and I have an auditing e-journal, which that's literally where it resides, but it doesn't say forensic accounting, I don't think that SSRN's for me. So what we started to do is go much layer. So we have e-journals, and then we have topics, and then subtopics, and sometimes they go to subtopics, but it's that granularity so that people can find a home that makes them feel comfortable to be there and be part of that community. And that turned out to be a very interesting aspect for us.
Two more great talks, thanks very much. Greg, I was struck by your comment about scholars needing more outlets. One of the founders of Archive told me that nobody ever got a job based on what they put on Archive, but it was what we published in a journal. So what do you think about the idea that what scholars need is not more outlets, but more quality outlets that are going to get them jobs or a grant? I mean, that in biomedicine, those are the drivers of publication. And as a result, there is a bottleneck, the typical cell nature science bottleneck, where everybody feels that they have to publish there in order to be recognized sufficiently to get both of those things, a job and a grant.
I know the quote, I know the person, and I've had the conversation, so with all due respect, I disagree. Just like if I keep pouring water into this pitcher, it's eventually going to overflow. One of the stats that I just love is that 90% of all scientists that ever lived are alive today. So you have more people creating more research. You just have to have either expanded pathways or more outlets. And again, I speak from the social sciences and the humanities. We get regularly requests to verify, validate download counts and other metrics because they are being used in the social sciences, in law schools and business schools and other places around the world. So we spend a significant amount of time, money, and effort to validate and verify our metrics because we know that they are being used in those categories. And as I said, from a publication standpoint, we think it's great when somebody gets access to an idea that's been published later on and definitely improved and worked on, but when it gets that core idea earlier, we think that's wonderful. But we also think that a preprint can be the resting place of a lot of research. If I'm Gene Fallman, I won the Nobel in economics a couple of years ago, and I want to write a quick little update paper about what I see happening in Latin America. I mean, does Gene need to, does he need to publish? I mean, he doesn't, right? I mean, he's proven his worth, and maybe he just wants to write something and share it. And then that sharing is the broadest possible way that you can to the most granular communities that you can.
So does it just take time for that to percolate through other realms of scholarship?
I think so. I think you're proving it at bioRxiv.
Nowhere near that, though. seems to me that there are big variations in different communities, at least within biomedicine, as I see.
I think the most important aspect is to understand that it's not anything at 10,000 feet anymore. It's at 10 feet.
Yeah.
And there are areas that have to be cloistered. There's areas that have to be rigorously reviewed or replicated or whatever because they need to be. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's kind of got lumped into the bucket that I think can start to be splintered off.
Greg, at the risk of being predictable, tell us about Elsevier and what that says about sustainability.
Sure. Oh, Tom's here. I got to be quiet. No. The short answer is that SSRN, was profitable and cash flow positive halfway through our 6th year. So by 7 years in business, we were making money, and this is all over the website. We've poured over $1 million per year back into research and development. So we were never built to be sold. That was never our model, and quite honestly, never ever thought that we would. And then something funny happened. The world started to change. And we started to face some constraints about what we could do in a short time frame. And then Elsevier bought Mendeley. And I know Victor and Jan and Paul, know those guys for years, and so I watched them very, very closely. And Elsevier, everybody was kind of watching to see what would happen when they bought Mendeley. And not only have they allowed them to continue to be Mendeley and continue to be their own culture and continue to be successful, but they've significantly ramped up the speed upon which that was possible. I don't think Mendeley today would ever be possible without Elsevier and their resources. And so when we look at the social sciences, which are very, very realistically, having trouble as a set of disciplines, more money is moving to STM than SSNH. And so we were concerned about how quickly we can help make an impact on that. And so for us, the pathway that made the most sense was to have more resources devoted to the SSNH communities that we serve. So that's the catalyst for why we did the transaction.
So I'm relatively new to this world, so maybe this is a naive observation or question, but it seems to me that one possible outcome to sort of address your question is that if preprint repositories can become the home for the negative study or the reevaluation of something that's already been published, because those don't get accepted typically in prestigious journals. People want to publish in new novelties and things like that. Is there a home in this preprint landscape for that type of study, which then builds its own legitimacy, and so that becomes the thing, the service that you're providing? That's really environmental.
Yeah, so I think there could be a home for that. What I worry about is within open access, within the legitimate OA players like PLOS, there's also that layer of peer review, and I would really, really worry if I used to worry that there was no outlet for negative results in reproducibility studies. Now there is one. I would be equally worried if the only outlet skipped the peer review, skipped the the bias vetting and all of those things that publishers do. So I think the repositories, and you guys can answer that as well, will be a place for those, but I really hope there's a place for those also within the peer reviewed landscape, and I do think that Gold Road Open Access offers that. So
yeah, we've seen in the social sciences some negative results journals and reproducibility journals. Political science has a few of them, and so that's starting to percolate up. When we started the Anthropology and Archaeology Network a few years ago, we created in all areas of that particular subnetwork, we created negative results e-journals. Again, I agree with Roy that there's real value in a high-quality review of negative results, so you can truly learn something from it. And then we also believe that there's a home for negative results that just otherwise would be swept under the rug, and people don't get a chance to learn from them. So there is, today's solution is the cause of tomorrow's problems, always.
To answer your question directly, submissions to bioRxiv can be tagged as new results, confirmatory results, or contradictory results. 2.5% are contradictory. So, and we're of course curious about that. And I think, I mean, maybe we just don't, it's not well enough known yet. But I also think that in the biomedical research community, there are few incentives to writing up that kind of work. And writing it up is a significant effort. And there's also a great, if you say, I have failed to reproduce your work or my results differ, then an argument ensues. And neither party really benefits very much, except in terms of personal triumph. But the community as a whole hasn't really benefited from those kinds of arguments. So I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see more of that kind of dialogue going on. Not to say that it shouldn't, but I just think at the moment we don't have structures that really do it.
I have two small questions on this. Actually, it's one big question. Any sustainability, I think we need financial support. So my question is, especially on the social science, I guess funding is not like natural science. We have big foundation. We can pay the open access fee from all the. So my question is for you, we have this, we want sustainability, especially for social science. I want to know, the revenue from government or from others. This is the first question. And the second question, I really want to know, on the social science, if you charge the open access fees, how do you do it? Because I'm from China. My press have two groups. One is social science, one group from natural science. Natural science is not that problem. If you want to own access, publish the OE papers, they have supported from foundation. From social science, it's difficult. They can get the foundation support, but money is real. It's not so much. So this is my question. I really want to know your sustainability. How to get support from which? This is my very frankly, sorry. I want to know, interesting.
We're talking about the EPC
Maybe
for
my English is not
STM versus social science? No,
Yeah,
I'll talk about that.
somebody, no, I can't translate. Okay.
So I'll just touch on the last question first, which was essentially there's a lot more money for APCs in science than there is in social science. And, what I'll say is, generally the prices are less for APCs in social sciences. The social science publishers can charge a lot less and so then the question is, well, because often the money is coming from the pockets of the researcher or the author as opposed to from the funding agencies. So they can charge less. I do think that, within that, there's still other ways you can make money, such as, reprints. I think there are still the services that a social science author wants in terms of impact and things like that could be very similar. But it is a different model and it's a harder model. I mean, there's just less money there. Yet there seem to be, increasing demands on the social sciences to publish open access, even in the absence of the funding, which I think gets to be problematic. But generally it's price and services and things like that. And then there are some social sciences, law, where they're trying to become, where lawyers can afford APCs. in a way that perhaps, historians or linguists cannot. So.
Yeah, that's completely true, is that there's just a significant difference between those kind of core disciplines. I should probably say, just in case for those of you who don't know it, is that, SSRN's was funded by the founders. So I wrote a check, Mike Jensen wrote a check, and a few others wrote checks. We have no donations, no contributions, no bank debt, no venture capital, no investment banking money. It was literally bootstrapped. I have the welts on my back to prove what that's living like for the last 20 years, but that allows you to have a freedom that taking money in whatever form or fashion from somebody else doesn't. So there's good and bad to both of that. You asked also about our revenue model. Again, we allow anybody to submit content that they hold the rights to. We allow them to submit it for free, and then anybody in the world to download that content freely. So as Mike Jensen likes to say, we give it all away and make it up on volume, but we've managed to figure out, as Roy said, the premium services that are valuable to our community. So we sell what we call the research paper series, is whereas a school or university or an institution says, I have this research, and SSRN is a much more cost-effective way for me to share that research, and so they pay us a fee. We're very successful in a number of the areas. That obviously doesn't work, for history versus how well it works for a business school or a law school. So there's other services, and again, I could run through that whole list on the right side and tell you that there's 5 services behind every single one of them that we tried to get to something that actually provided value. And in some cases, providing value still didn't mean that it was a chargeable sort of service. And we just chose we would continue to offer certain services for free because they made more sense to the community and helped build the community. Well, they didn't necessarily help the business model. So that's kind of this challenge, is that there are things that you really need to do that help build your brand, help build your communities, help build your offerings. And some of them are chargeable and some of them aren't.
Yeah, so just building on that, I would recommend experimenting. I mean, that's the only thing one can do, and there's a phrase a lot of innovators use, which is fail early, fail fast, fail cheap. The notion that, you're lucky if 1 in 3 things you do succeeds. So get out there, try something, and if it doesn't work, pull it quickly so it doesn't just become something you're stuck doing. But particularly in the social sciences, PLOS and others, in biomedical, sort of established a business model that people can copy. I think perhaps people copy it a little bit slavishly sometimes and should also be innovating. But, in other fields where there is no proven business model, try to find what your business model is. And the one thing what I've been seeing most is, not shockingly, it's if you've got a good community, you can try things and you can develop things. So I think, as far as open access with SSH content goes, it's going to be a lot around the societies and people who can build, continuing education and certification and all of these things around the content, which might not be the publication of the content itself.
Yeah, I think if you go into the process knowing that you are going to fail more than you are going to succeed, and do not allow yourself to be married to your mistakes, you then have a chance of being successful. But I get I get plenty of calls and emails asking me to come in and try to help people figure out what they've done, and almost always it's they are committed to a particular pathway. And it just, it's got to be that way. It just has to be that way. And I say, why? Well, because it's right. So even if it was right 5 years ago, it probably isn't right today. So it's that innovation that really becomes a cornerstone of being successful.
Run out of time.